Okay, are we good to go? Shall I start? Hi, everybody. It's Mary Rowe from the Canadian Urban Institute. The room is filling up as we see, the Zoom room. And I'm pleased, of course, to be welcoming you to this session and to be encouraging you to participate actively in this session on making the case for placemaking, what it is, and why does it matter. I work at CUI, and this is an initiative that Community Foundations of Canada also has been part of to help support 1,000 placemaking projects across the country through the last 2 years, I guess, Gay? It's probably been close to that, through the Healthy Communities Initiative. And it's a wonderful, wonderful community of placemakers that's been emerging across the country. And really pleased to be able to have a chance to continue to learn from all of you what's working, what's not, and what's next. And through the support of Infrastructure Canada and the Healthy Communities Initiative, which continues. It's a gift that just keeps on giving. So this session is a kind of way to kind of aggregate all the learnings, and it includes the Healthy Communities Initiative mobilizers and a lot of folks from the CUI City Talk community. So really pleased to have you all be part of this. Just a couple of Zoom, reminders about how Zoom works. Hard to imagine that we have to continue to tell each other how to do this, but remember about the mute button, all that stuff. Fortunately, this session en deux langues, en français et en anglais. So if you would like to hear in French, please go down to the bottom where the little globe is and indicate the language that you'd like to be hearing in. It will translate for you into the language that you would like. And you'll see the option there. Closed captions are also available in English by clicking also on the captions option at the bottom of your screen. We have a very active chat function in all these Zoom sessions. You can see Gay signaling, chat. This is your moment. So please make use of that. Chat away as people already are, checking in where they're coming in from. Thank you for doing that. As interactive as we possibly can. We encourage it to be that. And remember also that we continue to share the notes from the chat. So always be respectful, obviously, but to animate it and help problem solve and all the things that are important in these opportunities when we get together. In terms of land acknowledgements, I know that there are lots and lots of folks that would be aware that Toronto, where CUI is based, is the traditional territory of many First Nations and Métis, specifically the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Chippewa, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and it's covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Williams Treaty. There are lots of unsigned treaties and unceded territories in this country, and we continue as placemakers to be on the front lines of what tangible reconciliation needs to look like as we collectively address systemic exclusion and look to the future in a different kind of way, a more collaborative, a more equitable and just way. And that's always in our framing as we talk about placemaking. How do we do that in a much more democratic and collective way that recognizes patterns that were not that way? So we look forward to continuing to have that conversation with you. The themes that the HCI team are talking about here and the community that they are fostering, the placemaking community that they are fostering in the country, are specifically about what are the particular lessons and experiences that you've had over the past number of years in placemaking. Is this a superpower in terms of actually implementing community-driven change? What is the secret sauce of placemaking? How might placemaking enhance social connections and well-being? Tell us what you're seeing, what you're experiencing. What's the evidence, which we all know policymakers are preoccupied with. What's the evidence? And how can we build support for these incredible efforts? So a lot of what we're talking about is peer-to-peer learning, and what my colleagues at HCI are constantly doing is creating platforms for us to hear from one another, learn from one another, tell our stories, and communicate to a broader audience the momentum that's growing in this placemaking community across the country. So today's session is going to be hosted by Mitchell Reardon from Happy Cities. Hey, Mitch, I know you don't like to be called Mitch, but I still call you Mitch. Hello, Mitchell. And he's an award-winning community builder coming to us from the West Coast, specializing in healthy urban planning, design, placemaking, and engagement. And with Mitchell, we will have Leah Herman, coordinator of Open Streets and Placemaking, also from the West in North Van. And then two particular projects that we're going to hear about. One, Jason D'Amato, who's going to talk about Rise Edutainment, and Heather Marjorie, who's going to talk about the Festival of Neighborhoods and COVID-safe gathering spaces at the SDC in Waterloo region. So we're really lucky to have these folks take this hour with us and share what's working, what's not, the best and the brightest and all that stuff. So I'm going to pass over to you, Mitchell. Take it from there. I'll be back in about an hour to help with some Q&A. And please use that chat, folks, to animate and raise the questions that you want to be raising. Thanks, gang.
Thanks so much, Mary, and nice to see everybody here today. Really grateful to be here to speak with you. Just before we get started, you're going to see a poll that's just popping up from the CUI CHCI team. If you have a chance, really appreciate if you can answer this super short and easy poll. There are so many small acts of placemaking that occur every day. And I think as many of us are aware and we see and experience, they can have big impacts. But it's remarkable how many people doing this work wouldn't even consider themselves as placemakers. And that really prompts me wondering, how many others could help improve their communities if only given a little space and encouragement. This was the case in at Glenbrook Middle School in New Westminster, BC. It's located along a 20-kilometer corridor in Metro Vancouver, where more than 100 languages are spoken. And it's a school where kids like to bike, at least when it's safe. Like during Hub's cycling bike to school week. But a lot of kids don't always feel safe riding their bikes here. A sixth grader wrote to the city telling them that despite being on a designated bike route, that traffic, especially during pickup and drop off, meant that she wasn't comfortable biking to school, but wanted to. The city, to their credit, took changes. They acted really quickly, actually, changing the stop sign patterns at 2 key intersections. But they and the students wanted to do more. So we worked together to identify ways to improve the both sense and actual practice of safety along this corridor. And what we noticed that even with the stop sign changes, people driving cars were still rolling the corners. So, it was a stop sign, but, you didn't really need to stop if you wanted to keep that speed up. So together with the fantastic teachers and faculty at Glenbrook Middle School, we taught the students the basics of safe street design, how bump outs or curb extensions could help to reduce the speed of cars turning at the intersection. And then we challenged these 6th, 7th, and 8th graders to design what these bump outs might look like under a theme of community celebration and sustainability. Over the course of May and June, more than 60 students did. And then they voted on the winners. The winning classes got to have pizza parties, so there was this extra good incentive. A couple of months later, as we prepared through the summer, on a warm August day, the students came back and they actually painted the street. Beyond having their say on what street design could look like and how they could make it safer, these youth literally transformed their streets. And I don't think a single one of them would have described themselves as a placemaker before that day. And heck, probably a lot of them still don't. But in doing this project, they also created a space that reflected their community. The project gave them a sense of empowerment around city planning, and they got to experience, what responsive democracy can be. As we were wrapping up that day, we overheard one girl talking to a friend, and she said, in 20 years, I'm going to come back here with my kids and show them how I made this street safer and more sustainable. And that's, I think, one of the real powers of placemaking: the meaning and belonging, the pride in place, and the capacity building. And in this case, traffic safety, all rolled into one. Early on at Happy Cities, we learned that the way we shape our cities can build or break human well-being, the interface of the street, how we're able to move, whether that encourages people to interact with one another or discourages that kind of interaction. But I think more recently, we've also learned that the way we invite people to shape our cities is really important too. Participating in decision-making, and in some cases, literal city shaping, helps create a sense of connection and accountability for the projects, and also demonstrates how cities and other entities can be responsive to the needs of people. Placemaking is one powerful way to make this invitation. And there are a lot of different activities that fall within placemaking. Pop-ups to show people that alleys can do so much more than store cars and garbage. Simple improvements to your community, like putting chairs and tables out for neighbors to chat, having a chalk party to help underline that summer streets are for people, or working with neighborhood kids to build a little library. And in Canada, placemaking today takes place on the traditional and in many cases unceded territory of Indigenous peoples across this land. Without their care, these spaces wouldn't be here today. And despite systemic efforts at erasure, Indigenous communities are reinforcing their connections to the land again. The stewardship and subtle shaping of the environment over generations is fundamental to any sort of placemaking that is taking place here today. Among the most literal ways, it has included reclaiming spaces for memory, grief, gathering, and healing. And it's also starting to include more formal initiatives like Deborah Sparrow's Blanketing the City project as part of Vancouver Mural Fest. These are important steps towards reconciliation, and they bring people together, prompt discussion, and can encourage understanding. They are social discussion manifest in the public realm. A need to connect with one another is reflected in other types of placemaking too. Open dance lessons and musical performances that show us that placemaking doesn't need to be permanent, but rather that a gathering of people who together can shape a meaning of a space also fits under the placemaking umbrella. And whether an activity lasts a few hours, a few years, or more, placemaking doesn't need to be formal. Getting together with friends and playing music in the park or helping to maintain a community garden contributes to the health of the community for both people and place. Placemaking really does mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And this includes decision makers as well at the city level, provincial and federal. In many cities, streets like this were the status quo for decades. Between traffic and parking, placemaking was barely considered on many streets. Until a pandemic forced us to rethink the role of streets and the opportunities for placemaking as a way to socialize with one another, as a way to support local business, as a way to connect community. And the pandemic street transformations, they were like a huge version of one of my favorite civic placemaking projects. One of the ones that I think really inspired placemaking for me and helped me understand it. The City of Vancouver's Pavement to Plaza program. It started in 2010 with a temporary rainbow crosswalk, which at the time was the first in Canada, and continued with a summer-long street closure right next to it. And this was repeated for a number of years, testing to ensure that it was something that made sense in this community. And, when community engagement validated this placemaking experiment and underlined the desire for public space that celebrated the LGBTQ2QS plus community in the area, it was made permanent in 2016. Happy Cities had the privilege of helping to evaluate the well-being impacts of this space and several others that followed. Back in 2016, we conducted a psychophysiological study here with the University of Waterloo. And then in 2018, we conducted one of our public life studies to help understand how the space was making people feel in a similar space that hadn't been changed so we could compare. But the one that really sticks out to me was a pandemic public life study that we conducted at Jim David Plaza on May 15th, 2020, right after the first lockdown ended in BC. We were wrapping up this session and an older fellow, a guy named Teddy, came over. He'd seen our laptops and came over to ask how to connect to Wi-Fi. So we showed him and we ended up chatting for about 15 minutes about the lockdown, weather, and what summer might look like. And as we were saying our goodbyes, he thanked us. And he told us that this was the first real conversation he'd had since the pandemic had started. Human connection and the invitation for it. This is another one of the powers of placemaking. We've also seen the power of placemaking and how it can support well-being in other studies that we've conducted, like during New Westminster Streets for People program back in 2020. Here we studied 5 placemaking sites that had been implemented as spaces where we could safely physically distance and paired them with 5 nearby sites where no changes had been made. We have subjective well-being intercepts where people tell us how they're feeling in the moment and answer a few questions, and also some observation. What we found was that at the placemaking sites, people were more likely to want to meet their friends. Not an enormous surprise. I think 73% said they wanted to at the placemaking sites and 68% at the unchanged sites. But what struck us was more also wanted to meet new people if COVID wasn't a concern. 71% agreed with that at the placemaking sites compared to just over 50% at the unchanged sites. The difference was most pronounced among women as well. At the placemaking site, 3/4 agreed with this compared to just over 60% at the unchanged. For men, it was about the same at both, 73%. So what we were seeing was that, hey, this is having different impacts for different communities. People also felt that the placemaking sites reflected their communities better than the unchanged ones. And they felt safer there too. Something that was, again, more pronounced among women. And here, we asked, I feel safe visiting this place alone. 70% agreed at the placemaking site to just over 50 at the unchanged. And so with great aesthetics and compelling examples and supporting data, we're on our way to placemaking that supports well-being across the country, right? Well, a survey by the Canadian Institute of Planners and the University of Waterloo found that planners don't necessarily intend to change much post-pandemic. And so what they said was, despite calls for greater creativity and innovation, there is essentially no difference between what planners viewed as more important to downtowns pre and post-pandemic. And we're seeing this still, the signs of the relapse. Some cities had put in bike lanes and are now choosing to take them out. Others are seesawing back and forth. And cities and businesses are also grappling with how to make their patios or public plaza programs permanent. Complex regulations, costly permitting processes, structural engineer certification, and sometimes just outright removal. So the outcomes of placemaking are still a little bit unclear. And, at the community level, the demand and the interest is here. So what can placemakers and planners do to sustain this energy? Well, in many cases, it means meeting people where they are and listening to them, like the City of New Westminster did at Glenbrook. And this can take many, many forms, from community engagement to providing capital funding, to small neighborhood grants, to policy adjustments, all the way to just listening and setting aside preconceived ideas. And setting aside preconceived ideas was just what the city of Rotterdam did back in 2019. They noticed that Bloemhof, a neighborhood in the south side of the city, which incidentally was named the 4th worst neighborhood in the country in 2019 by the Minister of Housing, had really low walking rates and a lot of nuisance complaints to the police about youth hanging out. And they wanted to address this, and they felt the best way to do it was by implementing a series of parklets. Before jumping into design, we decided to engage with residents. Together with our local partners in Rotterdam, Humankind, we spent weeks in the neighborhood, listening to residents and beginning to nurture trust. And here's my colleague Hussam speaking with 3 older women from Turkey and Suriname who placed chairs on the streets to meet with one another and look after grandkids and just have a general pulse on what was going on in the community. Would they consider themselves placemakers? Almost certainly not. Were they creating a sense of place in their community? Absolutely. Through this engagement, we came to know a fellow named Mohammed, considered by many to be the father of the neighborhood. Years earlier, noticing a lack of activities for kids, he'd started putting toys out on his stoop. Another placemaker who would never use this term. He kept doing it, and the kids started growing up. And they became teenagers, but they always kept respecting him. He was one of the few formal connections that we or the city had to youth in this neighborhood. And he didn't think parklets were going to solve the problem. And the young men who trusted him enough to speak with us during a photography walking tour that we organized didn't think so either. The city, to their credit, was open to new ideas. They agreed to join a workshop that we organized in the community, and they listened. Listened to Mohammed, the unassuming placemaker. He and his volunteer team shared how many of his kids who lived in small apartments with a number of siblings They didn't have the space inside to hang out with their friends, so they often hung out on the street. But between calls to the police and rainy Dutch weather, the street wasn't a great option. What they needed was a covered space to hang out, stay dry, to connect. Mohammed wanted to open a bigger space, but had run into so many barriers that he'd nearly given up before. But this time, because the city was open to invite people to shape their city, because they were open to how the various forms of placemaking could manifest, things were different. Together with a local housing operator, the city and Mohammed were able to get a space where kids and teens could come hang out, with room to be themselves and with supportive community around them. And this is one small example of the power of placemaking. And as I'm wrapping up here, I'd like to leave you with two questions. How many Mohammeds has Neighborhood Small Grants, the CHCI program, or other community placemaking initiatives enabled? And how many are still waiting? Thanks very much. I think with that, I am going to introduce or invite Leah, Jason, and Heather to join our conversation.
Hey, greetings, everybody.
Yeah, sure, it'd be great. It's north now, Edwards, I mean, the one up on 15 and it's the area.
Okay. So
Oh, go ahead. Thanks, Mitchell. Go ahead.
I think we're all four of us are here now. Great. And I think we can all unmute to just have the chat. So the first thing that wanted to ask you about was, what are you doing with your work in terms of placemaking, and how is your organization enabling it? Leah, I'm going to pass it over to you first.
Thanks so much, Mitchell. And hello to everyone joining today. So I work at the City of North Vancouver within the public realm team. And my portfolio involves spearheading placemaking initiatives through our city's placemaking program called Play Embrace the Space. And it's somewhat unique to municipal government. So Play is all about community collaboration to transform public spaces into people spaces. And it's really about connecting residents through positive and fun experiences. As Mitchell went over in his presentation, in our city, we also early in the pandemic, our program was seconded to support our city's Main Street. And as a small and mighty program, it was quite a big undertaking. But with an expanded public pedestrian realm, as you see in the slide here, we were able to evolve the area through placemaking to establish dedicated spaces for street activation that really continue to support the community and local businesses today. And Play also has a parklet program, which we love. And this photo shows two of our converted shipping container parklets created through partnerships early in the pandemic. These public spaces have since evolved into much loved community hubs, and they support residents and adjacent businesses through the year to connect, to get together, to have a third space. I think the beauty of the Play program at a civic level is that it's community powered, it's low barrier, and it's fully accessible to everyone. I'll just pass it on to the next panelist.
Yeah, why don't we go over to you, Jason?
Sure. Thanks for having me, everybody. So my name is Jason. I am the operations director here for Rise Edutainment, also known as Rise Arts and Community Services. And how we've been engaging our communities and youth in placemaking is specifically through this project that we were funded by the HCI is we're known for putting together weekly open mic shows based out here in Scarborough. And it's been a community hub for youth, particularly for young artists as well, to come and share their stories, share their arts and crafts, specifically performance arts with the spoken word, poetry, music, singing, and rapping. And so we've been doing this weekly in Scarborough in a community center for the last 11 years now. But during the pandemic, of course, we were forced out of the community space that we were in, which was a city-owned space. And so we had to kind of pivot. We did the whole doing virtual shows and performances on those platforms, but it wasn't as engaging as how we would normally have had our events in person. And so, as things started to open up here in the city, we were graciously funded by the HCI to now bring our shows to public parks across the city. And so we did some shows here in Scarborough, as well as some downtown, and as well along Lakeshore and in the West End, based in like close to Etobicoke and whatnot. And so, yeah, we've been engaging, youth and artists specifically to take up spaces, whether if it's us partnering with other community organizations to do collaboration shows across the city to provide these platforms for youth and just people, anyone that from the community, if you don't even find yourself as an artist, to really be able to share your story, your craft, or maybe something that's pertaining to your community specifically, and voicing those concerns or questions or discussions that they really always wanted to have. And so by providing these platforms, it's really our way of getting people to be engaged civically, socially as well, especially during the pandemic, being isolated. That was the first thing that was taken away from people, is the spaces and the ability to connect and to be in rooms or in spaces with one another. And so a lot of our work has always been about cultivating safe and safer spaces and spaces for people to really be able to share these things that people have been holding inside themselves, or maybe have only been kept to themselves and not really being able to express themselves. And so through that, the work that we've done has carried us this far, and we look forward to continuing to grow. We're looking forward to connecting our communities here to now more communities across the province and hopefully across the nation as well.
So cool, Jason. Thanks so much for sharing that. I think we're all excited to hear more about some of the benefits that are coming from this, and some of the maybe challenges you faced in reaching this point.
Absolutely.
Heather, could you tell us a little bit more about what you've been up to?
Sure. So my name's Heather Majuri, and I work with the Social Development Center, Waterloo Region. And I currently coordinate the Festival of Neighborhoods. The Social Development Center also has a program called the Civic Hub. So during the pandemic, when we took funding from CHCI, we created a synergy between the Civic Hub and the Festival of Neighborhoods. And so we created a pop-up, COVID-safe pop-up installation, for lack of a better word. So it was a way to cope and to deal with the constrictions that were somewhat unpredictable during that time. So we decided to create a living room. So it was the COVID-safe pop-up living room. So it was simple in design. It was a couch or a kind of a futon-y type thing, with a lamp and a coffee table. So all those basic things that you would have in pretty much any living room. What we were leveraging, though, was the strangeness of having the living room outside. So allowing that opportunity for it to be something that would attract people just because it was a little weird. So that was the basic gist of it. And we ended up doing a few different experiments. I would say that we were, for most of this time, we were in the experimental phase of what was possible and what might be interesting and who we could kind of partner with under circumstances where people didn't know if they were going to be locked down again. So we played around with that. So I would say that the major impetus for the work was to play and just kind of see what would happen. Semiotically as well, it was about taking these very neutral set pieces and actually having them reflect back the community that we were working with. So our first installation was with Bring on the Sunshine. They're a African and Caribbean group locally. They were doing a fun day. So we set up a typical pop-up where we had a community connector with the living room. And once we got on site, got creative with some of the activities that we have through our activity trunks. So we had the living room, which invited people to come in and have casual conversations. It allowed us as well to be engaged in public education about COVID without it being heavy. So we were just also making sure if people needed a mask or if they wanted sanitizer, it was all kind of there. We also had a public health nurse from that community who was able to sit. So we had the living room, and then we had a fold out table and chairs that I call the kitchen. And so that's where people could hang and just talk to the public health nurse that they knew in their community. So it was a way to just kind of take all of that heaviness and maybe normalize things a little bit more inside really extraordinary circumstances. That was our first one. And then we installed the living room in actually what I would call a very practical placemaking neighborhood, which was a Better Tent City. So we installed the living room in a community that became a community and became a neighborhood during the pandemic of tiny houses. So there's about 40 tiny houses, sheds basically converted into tiny houses for people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And so we installed the living room there, and we used media for the most part to just hold interviews and have conversations with people. One of the visitors to the living room, she went and gave us a tour of her house, and we just let whatever would evolved. And we interviewed Nadine Green, who is the on-site coordinator and basically the impetus for that entire new neighborhood that is now in Kitchener and established. At that time, they were in the large parking lot in Kitchener that's used for snow removal in the winter. So they were there over the summer. So they weren't permanent. They didn't have a place yet to call home in terms of being a sanctioned neighborhood. So that was interesting. And then we partnered with a local group that does breathing. And then we have the living room inside. And that was an experiment in hybridizing the meeting. So some people were on location and others were on Zoom. I think that's what most of us started to use for the most part as our new way of meeting. So that began to create questions around hybridity, but also digital. There's placemaking in the digital world, and there's placemaking in the physical world, and how can they coordinate or complement each other, and when do they work in the best way, right? Because not everything works digitally and not everything works in place per se.
Thanks so much, Heather.
Okay.
I want to just highlight a couple of the community benefits that you're talking about. Social connection, drawing people together. It sounds like across communities as well. Having space for education and public health. Helping to support community that is coming together quite quickly. Having those third spaces where people can interact. These are all really important things. I'd love to ask Leah and Jason about some of the benefits in the work that you've been doing. And then Heather, we can come back and if there's anything you'd like to add, please do. But Leah, maybe you could start.
Sure, thanks. I think the positive aspects really are seen in the day-to-day and the social connection happening in the spaces created through placemaking. So our main street is really now a place to go to rather than a place to move through. And I see this especially with seniors and youth who frequent open street spaces, especially parklets, and when working with schools and community groups who really enjoy programming and stewarding these spaces, which brings energy and life to the street. I think the beauty in taking a placemaking approach in our public realm is that it's so co-creative, and it's all about community and thinking about the end user in every project. And I love what you said about going out and going to, because that's really what's informed and made our program so meaningful in terms of for the community, but also a benefit to the businesses in the area, and kind of bringing that stickiness or that, more foot traffic to the area. And I think over the challenges of the past years, taking a placemaking approach has really brought so many community partners and stakeholders together to make some really cool things happen. And just a couple quick examples is we were able to provide employment to youth artists to animate our Main Street, which was great at a time when there wasn't a lot of opportunity happening for youth. And then also we worked closely with the North Shore Pride Alliance to create a really safe space for programming and outreach and celebration. So it's really cool to see our community reflected in the spaces that we've worked so hard to bring to the community. And I think just lastly, it's super rewarding to just be out there and see community connecting in spaces that weren't there before. So, yeah.
Really cool. I have a question to ask a little bit later about how you're working with these communities, but before Jason, would you like to share any more of the benefits? It sounds like empowering youth, introducing people to being on the stage were a couple of the starting ones, but yeah, please take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's plenty of benefits, with the personal ones being just providing the place for people to kind of express themselves, share their talents. Like that's the base level of the benefits that you get as a performing artist, or even just as an audience member coming to our events. But primarily, like when we started Rise 11 years ago, we were youth coming from communities who um, had little access. I don't want to say that there was no access, but there's little access, and I say that because there's plenty of resources. But the problem is with our communities is, you know, the access to them is the difficult part. Like unless you're going to community centers, unless you're going to, or unless you're in contact with youth workers, social workers, chances are you're not going to come across these social services or community services that you actually do need to thrive and progress, and be an engaged citizen in your community. Um, unless you are connected to these people or to these institutions, you're less likely to have access to these sources or to these resources. And so the things that we have done and in the way that we have carried out our placemaking is ensuring that we are sharing resources and bringing in the people. The artists that are performing on our stages are probably social workers or youth workers as well, so they're able to bring the resources that they have with them that are housed in their community centers to the people that are coming to these shows and to these events. So bringing all the resources with them to wherever we are is mobilizing as much access as possible. So that's definitely one of the bigger um, benefits. Is like you come thinking that you're here to enjoy great uh, undiscovered music or undiscovered artists, but then now you're also getting access to social services that you probably didn't know were aware of, or didn't know how to access it as well. That's definitely one of the bigger pauses. But also, again, in order to empower youth, in order to empower communities, they need to see examples of how spaces can be taken up. Like your general corners, like, yeah, you have your buskers, you have, street performers and stuff that would take up space regardless if they have permits or not. But to be able to bring youth out into these spaces, or even, bringing them, showing them and allowing them to volunteer and show them how these spaces are actually turned into places that they can take up and bring about projects that they might have planned for themselves, to make these changes in their communities. Just being able to um, guide the community and guide youth into these spaces, and letting them know, like, just because we're doing this doesn't mean it doesn't end here. This is something that you can also do as well too, and we'll show you how to do it, whether it is through volunteering or whether it is through interning through our organization. We're very open to sharing how the whole process actually even happens as well too. So there's many layers to the work that we do. There's of course the entertainment side that really hooks and brings people in. But then there's also the other side of it too, where we now curate and ensure that the content that we're creating, or the content that we're sharing and expressing, is both positive but also supportive in allowing people to access different resources beyond the arts. So yeah.
Love the capacity building component that you're talking about. Like, hey, you can do this too. You don't need to just be a participant. And you know what you're saying about creating value for people to participate, like public health initiatives may not always resonate with youth, and so doing something that they think is awesome, and then also just being present in the space to help support and share information on other topics that they're probably not coming to like out of passion. Is so important. And that it sounds a little bit like what you were doing, Heather. One point that stood out to me that we hadn't chatted about in the lane or in the living room project was the digital component. So you're making it accessible to a community that, you know, may still not be able to participate in in-person activities or may not be comfortable to do so. That's another really important benefit, that we have the ability to meet in different ways. Is there anything else that you wanted to share, Heather, around that or other benefits that you think are important to highlight?
I think that one of the biggest benefits for us was collaboration, or establishing that the possibility of collaborating in a way where the living room was like, I'm gonna use the metaphor of a pipe. That's the best I got right now. You know, piping. And how pipings fit together, and there's always the intersection of the pipe where, you know, and there might be 3 pipes or something, and they connect, and they got the little connectors. That's how good I am with city planning. But anyway, so the living room was able to become that intersection, or that joint in the piping, where you could have different groups come together and have a conversation that was safer, even about COVID, because sometimes it wasn't about how much hand sanitizer I need. It was, I don't have the right information, or I don't know where to get information, or I don't know how to think about any of this. So that helped with that. And it helped us bring, like we did a music event where we installed the living room as part of our front of house, so that people could get that information. So we were partnering all the time with different groups. And so that, and the ability to make it strange, I found useful.
Very cool. Thank you. So, you know, from Jason and Heather, we're hearing about the various methods that were used to attract people and to share the information that was coming through it, but also to build capacity. Leah, coming back to you from a city perspective, what were some ways that you found effective in working with community in helping to shape some of the spaces that you were sharing?
I think the most valuable piece to that work was just going to the community through, whether it be pop-up style engagement or engagement through the spaces we created was huge. Like going to people, the users in the parklet spaces, to talk about how we could evolve these temporary installations into something more semi-permanent that could serve the community year round. And that was what we were hearing the most was, you know, we want to keep these social spaces. You know, we live in a somewhat of a dense area, and we love having these third spaces on our main street. So I think a lot of it was going to. I think a big part of it is leadership. Like, we have a very progressive council who has a very ambitious vision to create the healthiest small city in the world, and they're very much invested in this program from the grassroots, the ground floor of the community and up. And that's what helps us do the work that we do. And also we have some really great community partners, whether it be the library or our neighborhood house, that get on board to really support and build the work. And I can't say enough about the staff that I work with that do some amazing work and really take and care about taking a placemaking lens to their planning process and you know, the larger strategy and policy development. So
thanks for sharing some of those points. You know, having that leadership that is making the space to conduct this in a municipal setting is so important, but then those partners as well. Libraries and neighborhoods, they're just so great. these are some of the benefits. These are some of the great things that have come. Often when trying to put together these projects, there's also some challenges or barriers that come up. And so first, I'd love to hear from the grassroots side, and then loop back to see kind of from the inside what that might look like. So Jason, were there any challenges or barriers that came up when you were putting this together?
Yeah, absolutely. During the times of COVID, of course, the barriers were the the space and social distancing and just following health measures. But in general, because we've over the years, we've always worked with indoor community spaces. So getting permits or getting access to spaces quite different than having to access city spaces. And so that was a bit of like we had to navigate a little bit more about that and finding the right people that can ensure that we're booking the right space in the park that it doesn't get um, double booked by another person that might be booking the space for another event. Ensuring all the permits are proper, ensuring again what we're having here in the discussion in the chat about disposal of waste. If we were catering or providing any food, ensuring that the disposal of any garbages or trash is handled. So there's a bit of things that we had to maneuver and imagine. So it was almost as if we were planning a festival even. Which is something that we do have experience with, but not necessarily extensive experience, just because we've only been working with smaller community spaces. So that was definitely one of the bigger challenges is shifting from an indoor space to now the outdoor, where it's more public, where there's more care that needs to be taken with the land that you're working on, and ensuring the safety of the community, especially.
And were there any things that, say from the municipal government or other public authorities that were either really helpful or that you would maybe like to see done a bit differently in the future?
Yeah, I mean, the process is like it's of course you're just filling out an application with everything, with all the details, the dates and times. Um, I'd say it was pretty efficient once we got to get connected with someone that was able to support us and help us in filling out the the documents. But I do feel for the people that aren't as connected or don't know where to start. And so maybe possibly having signages, even if it's on websites or even if it's in community centers themselves, and showing and providing instructions as to step-by-step instructions on how to access these forms or access the right people to ensure that your form is submitted correctly, because one wrong thing on the form can pretty much mess up the whole application, and then that pushes back your event dates, that pushes back all your plans. And so ensuring that there's like a support worker or even someone that ensures your applications is good and great to submit on the first go is, I think, would be the biggest help. I think that could help people in general. But in terms of like processes, like I can complain about how the website looks or how the process is taken, but that's just how the government or how institutions work, right? So, but if there is that extra support that can work on people at an individual level as opposed to just someone on the screen or just a number or just an application, then I think that would greatly increase the amount of people that are going um, to try and access these spaces or try to make their own events and stuff.
Thanks for that. And that's part of the invitation, really making it easy and accessible to be a part of that. Another approach, aside from a navigator, which can be really helpful, that seems effective, is with neighborhood small grants, just super, super simple applications. And maybe there's more on the back end that needs to be addressed, but you're like, yes, this is good. Now we're going to help you take the rest of the steps. Heather, are there any barriers or challenges that you faced when conducting your living room project? And
For sure. There was even in the execution of the idea, making sure that we could, like when you explain to people, it's like, I want to put a living room in the park, or I want to put a living room, like they needed to understand what I was even saying. Because it's one thing to see something, it's another thing to try to explain it and say why that might be useful. But what was useful about that was there was conversations whether or not we actually got to the point of actually place making it. So even if we didn't get that far, we were able to have good conversations with people. And the other thing was with this kind of thing, with an installation versus something that's more permanent, the ephemeral nature of it is something that is a challenge, because something happened, but if you have no real artifact of what happened, then did it happen? It's the tree in the forest kind of. So using basic media and keeping it affordable and doing some video work to accompany it was helpful. We had lots of sound issues, mind you, when you're using consumer equipment. So that was an interesting challenge that I think we're still playing with too, because ultimately I like to see people using their technology in a way that it's empowering and not just as a consumer. So we're trying to kind of look at what that is. Weather. Weather was an issue. We did one installation that was really amazing because we had the gale force winds. And I learned a lot about a safe working environment. And labor, right? The hidden costs of, you know, hauling the couch and things like that. Like those are hidden costs that people don't often think about. Funders don't think about them necessarily. City people don't necessarily think about them because I think people like the finished product, but the labor involved really does exist. And so it does, you know, it's valuable. It's very valuable. And yeah, other than that, I think, yeah, it was pretty positive.
Very cool. Thanks for that. Coming to the other side. So Leah, you know, you're working within the municipal government. As you were looking to implement placemaking along North Vancouver's Main Street, did you experience any barriers or challenges?
There were lots of challenges, lots of opportunities, lots of learning experiences. That's the beauty of this process, is it's ever evolving and it's always user informed. So, but as you can imagine, Mitchell, on a city's main street, there's always a lot of resistance when it comes to reclaiming street space for people over cars. So that's certainly, you know, and definitely over the first year was challenging. But I really think the pandemic provided that opportunity to show how our streets and our parks and our plazas can be used differently. And a lot of residents, you know, we weren't allowed to travel. They really got to experience the city in new ways and really see the value of investing in a people-focused public realm. And certainly the community that comes to the area, the Main Street, you hear like a lot of great stories about how the spaces are used and how they really want to hope that these spaces stay. And the businesses as well in the area, you know, investing time speaking with the same kind of process, ever evolving, you know, like maybe certain business really needs, you know, a drop-off zone. So that was a challenge for them through making, you know, expanded streetscape. So just like really working with the businesses to figure out how we can support both community and, you know, continue to support the economic activity in the area was such a learning process. But it was just really about community coming together, and seeing that area transform has been really rewarding. The other big piece from a city level is always maintenance. So, you know, as a busy Main Street, like how do we maintain these spaces so that they're always clean and safe? And so it's kind of the reverse process, like where we typically would go to a community and work with the community to create and steward the space. But through the pandemic, it was so recovery focused that the city really, you know, took the initiative to like make sure that we were providing safe spaces. So it's been kind of this evolving process of working with the community who uses the spaces to help steward the spaces. And I can say that garbage is really a key indicator of popular spaces, but also trying to figure out ways that, you know, people take more ownership and take care of what's out there so that we can hopefully keep a lot of it in place. Yeah, and like you had mentioned in your presentation, evolving from temporary to permanent, or what that looks like, you know, a lot of cities are still grappling with that. So
Definitely. So we have just a couple of minutes before Mary's going to jump back in and open up Q&A with the audience. There's been some great questions coming up in the chat. It sounds like you're all working with, really engaged communities, diverse communities in the areas where you live. Is there any sort of next thing that you'd like to see in terms of, creative strategies or placemaking? And we'll have to keep this one really short, but just like an aspiration for where you'd like to see the work you're doing, or maybe, you're pivoting and would like to go in another direction, but just one idea that each of you would love to share around what might come next in your work. And Jason, we'll go to you, Heather, and then back to Leah.
Yeah. I mean, we're always like our organization is called RISE, and the abbreviation is called Reaching Intelligent Souls Everywhere. So, expansion definitely is always on the horizon for us, whether that is expanding our shows, expanding the artist development that we normally take part in, or even the social work that we do. Um, with the pandemic and things going virtual, that really helped to expand or open our eyes to see how far we could potentially have in terms of the reach, in terms of who we're able to reach out to. When we were doing our shows virtually, we were having people tuned in or performing from wherever they were. Some places were in the UK, some places were in parts of the African continent, as well as places in South America, and even across Canada as well too. So there was the potential that there could be something internationally or even domestically across the nation. So for us, I think it's strategically trying to see, where is the best possible next place that we can potentially go to, and not just go there and parachute and then leave, but really go there and establish and create or bring up some new leaders and new youth that have been looking for something like this in the community, and share the knowledge that we've been able to gather for the past 10 years or so, and really develop this model that we've done in leveraging the arts as a way to bring forward community issues and community concerns and actions and ways to organize grassroots organizations, really trying to not necessarily mimic, but follow the same kind of formula in raising new leaders across, whether it is across the nation or internationally as well too.
Super
so that's
powerful.
definitely one of our biggest things. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Jason. I really hope that is successful with you. I'm sure it will take many forms. Heather, over to you.
I think we just want to find as many new places and ways to install the living room and see what kind of pops up, literally. The other day we had it at an open house, even for the SDCWR, and we were able, we have board games that are social determinants of health. There's so many different ways to be able to engage people that are fun and not too heavy, but we can also have those difficult conversations. I'm hoping that the living room is going to be installed in another project that somebody's doing with placemaking and arts, where they've dug a hole in one of our parks, and it's the size of a grave. And so I'm hoping to install the living room there as well, and we can have conversations about displacement and utilize that again in some ways. The power of, I would say, surprise and invitation can be really useful, fun, and also help us have conversations that are tougher to have in other ways. So those are my
Wonderful.
thoughts.
Thank you. I'm seeing lots of good questions coming in. I'm going to pass it over to you, Leah, for your aspirations, and then we'll pass it to Mary and the audience.
I'll keep it short for questions. Essentially, pre-pandemic, our program was a pilot, and it really showed the value of small interventions can have big impact, can have collective impact. And so my ambition is to grow the program through a placemaking in the city framework. So that's kind of the next chapter, I guess, that we're moving towards. And we're all really excited to work together to make that happen.
Very cool. Thank you. And Mary, I think we're over to you now.
Great. What a great conversation. And I always appreciate the vibrancy that happens in the parallel universe of the chat. So it's a real credit to you as guests and panelists that you end up sparking so much conversation that goes on while you're chatting. They're all chatting amongst themselves. So I'll see if we can weave in some of these questions. And as everybody knows, these sessions get recorded and will get posted on the Placemaking website and on CUI's website on City Talk as well. So as we said, in his name, he said, the conversation begins and it continues. So I appreciate that. Couple of specific questions for you guys. I love the idea of the living room outside, Heather. I just love this because I think part of what we're struggling with in all of CUI's work is what is workspace, what is home space, what is common space, what is shared space. It's kind of all up for grabs now, right? And we've got to think carefully about how do we make all of our places and spaces welcoming and hospitable so that people can move more in a more fluid way. And you all are doing that in really provocative, thoughtful ways. Here's a question around digital. How do we serve the community that is perhaps more restricted in their movement? They might be older or they have a disability or something. And how do we balance this in real life, in physical proximity with also digital components? Who wants to take that? Jason, do you want to start that? And then just any other comments about how do we balance digital with in real life? What do you think?
Yeah, for us, I mean, again, just the pandemic bringing in the whole need to be able to be more digitally accessible.
Yeah.
In our shows now, a lot of our shows are live streamed even, unless it's an outdoor event that has limited access to internets. Yeah, most of our shows now have been accessible via the internet.
So you're doing hybrid placemaking.
Essentially, yeah, at this
Right.
point now. And it's, like sure we'll get like 5-10 people, sometimes 20 online, but it's the fact that we are able to increase the accessibility of it just by using technology that has always been around, but we've never really been able to leverage it in this way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely one way that we've also done it. And then the flip side is we've also kind of included, again, this hybrid model of now with our programming, with our artist development, and some of the other programs that require the internet, such as our VR program, which also kind of introduces youth to creating meta artwork and virtual reality and AR and stuff like that. So just being able to incorporate new technologies and old technologies as well to be able to show that, again, art doesn't just live in the space; it can travel at light speeds if you provide the means for it to.
It feels like we're being catapulted into this multiverse where we're going to have to live at all these levels all the time, right? I know. Let me ask another question. Anybody else can chime in on digital as well, but I have another one, which is this coming out of the chat. This notion of temporary versus permanent. And how do we reconcile that? I'm wondering, Heather, you're nodding. Talk to us about that. Is placemaking like a muscle, that you have to keep working so you don't worry too much if something has a lifespan and goes away because you do another one? Or should we be thinking about we want to do things that have a lasting presence? Thoughts on that? Maybe Heather and then Leah.
I think it's both. I really think it's both, because I think sometimes you're what's the word I'm trying to think of? You're adapting and you're innovating simultaneously.
Right.
And so I think it's a dynamic process of trying different things and then seeing what has the spark of permanency and where the community is going to lead you into saying, this is something we want to maintain and keep. I think, I'm not sure, because I'm kind of new to this, like I'm an artist, but this placemaking is my newest kind of, the equivalent we have like in theater per se would be like site specific, right?
Yeah.
So, and as far as digital goes, one of our experiments with digital that I found really interesting was about health and wellness. And so we had somebody doing breathing that they do online, but they came into the living room, and then they had people from all over the place doing these breathing techniques with the people that were also in the space. And it was thematic because we were dealing with COVID. So we were dealing fundamentally with breathing and being, right? So I found that interesting. It was interesting.
And it's interesting, this idea that an act of placemaking could actually transform the experience of that place, that may be completely changing. Is that your experience, Leah, in North Van? Like, are you trying to do these things in parallel? And sure enough, somebody said, hey, how about VRs? Are we doing augmented reality in these spaces? I knew that would happen as soon as I raised it. Go ahead, Leah, comment on it.
We're not there yet.
We'll catch up. We're catching up. Okay.
Yeah, catching up. Essentially, I agree with Heather. It's both. Our program's all about sparking that excitement, getting people excited about city shaping, being part of creating the spaces that we share, and really making meaningful connections through those shared spaces. So I think with our program, it is kind of lighter, quicker, cheaper, tactical, but it has evolved through COVID to become more semi-permanent. And like I had said in the introduction with the slide, is that that street has evolved so much over the last 3 years, just based on community collaboration and partnership support and grants, and like just people saying what they love about their main street and trying to be tactical in ways that like can meet that need. And then, you know, maybe the bigger brains than mine can like take that in the planning process and make it more permanent. But it's really about going to the community and thinking about that end user who's going to be using this space. And it doesn't have to be like this big, huge investment. It can just be something that serves the need and continues to evolve. And I often think that's a better approach.
Yeah, again, and to be flexible and adaptive. That's certainly one of the arguments we use all the time. More flexible, more adaptive reuse all the time. Okay, here's one big bugaboo that everybody's asking about. Other people are asking in various ways on the chat. And sadly, we get asked it all the time. And I know it's kind of an annoying question, but we still have to ask it. And maybe, Mitchell, you may have an answer. I think people are saying, do we have evidence? Do we have data? Do we have proof? Can we show that footfall and more people hanging out results in more academic activity, better social outcomes, better? What have we got? Who's got some data to make the case? Amy's asking for this in Vancouver, out west, because she works on the local economy stuff. What have we got? Who's got some data?
I think I can jump in with that. So Happy Cities has this public life study methodology we've been using since about 2017, where we combine subjective well-being intercepts, which are basically just surveys, but we're not asking opinions. We're asking how people feel in the moment. And then we also have an observation component where we're looking at behavior observation, how long people are spending in space, are they alone, are they together, or otherwise. We take the SWBI and observation and do a comparative study. That could be a before, after, so before an intervention goes in or after the placemaking is there, or in a lot of cases, it's already there because the client has said, look how good this is. Can you like help us prove it? And so we'll take a site nearby, very similar demographic makeup, very similar built environment, try and get as many similar characteristics as possible and make that comparison. On the well-being in the moment, it consistently across the board, we're seeing just how powerful these type of interventions are. And one of the things that it's not quite database, but it's definitely informed by all these studies, is community fingerprints. Does it look like the community has played a role there? Or does it look like it's a slick sort of, corporate level intervention that is being maintained in that way? So a little bit messy can actually be really good. And that seems to correlate with better subjective well-being outcomes in the moment. The business one can be a little bit tricky because a lot of businesses don't love sharing their economic figures, but you can correlate it with like cell phone data to see where people are moving and how much time they're spending. It isn't a direct correlation, but if you see over time, you can start to measure that. And of course, there's some really notable examples on the economic side. I think Times Square in New York is probably the most famous of how removing it from cars and turning into placemaking was super economically successful. That one I'd love to be able to dig in with cities a little bit more on, but the well-being side, so strong and pretty consistently clear, as long as it's not astroturfed in. Like people have to be a part of it for it to really be successful.
Anybody else got evidence, proof? What have you got that we can say to folks? I mean, we're trying to make the case that this is a worthy investment. Got anything else?
I could speak on it a little bit. I can't say I can provide hard data and numbers that say like this is how much foot traffic and businesses have benefited from the work that we've been doing. But so our work that we do here at Rise is based in Scarborough, Ontario, which is about 30 minutes out of the downtown Toronto core. And so, Scarborough for many years now has always been known as the suburbs that's outside of the city. And it's not really known for the greatest things, a lot of gang and gun violence and just negative connotations. And so for us to be doing this work that we do and trying to shed a positive light in the communities and the people that live here and the things that come from our city and that come from our city and town, the positives, the motivational people, the leaders that are coming out that have impacted Toronto as a whole. I think that's evidence that when people are coming to your events or your projects and your programs, and they're saying like, "Wow, I never knew this is what was happening over here in this community, and it's such a great thing," and it changes that impression that they have on your city and on your community. I think that's evidence enough in that just being able to bring people out and change their mindset on a specific community, like that's evidence in my opinion.
We're trying to constantly look for what are the really valuable lessons out of COVID, the old, how do we make lemons out of lemonade? And it seems to me that part of your work is that people focused suddenly on, oh, we have to make our places better and stuff that's been happening. There are lots of people on this chat, you guys and all the people listening here who've been doing placemaking for 10, 15 years. Maybe it wasn't called that. And now suddenly people are paying attention. So the question is going to be, can we get enabling conditions and policies to promote it? And can we get more resources into communities' hands at the hyper local level? It's not that much, right? It's often cheap. Last words to each of you. If you had one phrase, one sentence that you want everybody to think about as they go forward in their chilly or not so chilly, or maybe it's a smoky day, depending on where you are in the country. One sentence, Mitchell, one sentence from you. What would you have people think about?
There's so much power to support the community through placemaking, to unlock all sorts of different ways to engage and participate and validate and support democracy. Placemaking can do so much. We didn't get to really talk about the many components of it. So much power in it, and it's a critical component to, I think, the future of our healthy civic discourse and capacity.
The conversation always is just continuing. A sentence from you, Jason.
Go outside and believe in yourself, believe in what you believe, and go and try it. Like all of us here have pretty much done that. We believe in the initiatives that we've gone on to lead. And without it, it wouldn't have happened. And so we can do all this work, and there's plenty more work to be done. And it takes the community and others to really get that work done.
Just acknowledging, as I said it quickly, in which people are reinforcing in the chat, to remember that we've got a quarter of the country that can't go outside at the moment because it's too smoky. What a huge point, right?
You're
but
right,
yeah,
you're
hear
right.
you. It's all about taking take the first step, create the living room inside, outside, wherever you are. Leah, and then Heather, a sentence from each of you.
Sure. I love the saying in the placemaking world, and it works. It's start with petunias, meaning start small and go from there.
I like start with petunias.
Don't start small and go from there. Never underestimate the power of small interventions to have big impact. Keep it low barrier, start small. The beauty of placemaking is that it's an ever evolving process, and it really can make a difference in a community.
Never underestimate the potential of petunias.
Yes, that's it.
Oh, last sentence to you, Heather. What do you want people to think about?
When considering evidence, consider what the tools are that you're using to gather the data.
Yeah.
And consider what kind of questions and data you want to understand, because numbers are not always as useful as we think in terms of understanding impact and motivation and general feelings of social. And I do know for us, just even the gratefulness of a social event when none could happen mattered.
And again, for us to take something from this extraordinary 3 years we've been in, to take it and take the things that worked well and be positive about it. So thank you. Mitchell, thank you for hosting. Great to see you. Always important to see always appreciative to see the leadership from Happy Cities and to hear your particular perspective. Jason, Leah, and Heather, wonderful to have you here with the Healthy Communities Initiative team. And I'm happy at CUI to be a continued partner with Gay and Gabriella and Naomi, our colleagues that work on this important piece of investment, and for us to move the needle for everyone to understand why placemaking, even petunias, is valuable. A couple of things coming up. This will get posted online, as you know, so you'll be able to read it and send it to your friends, and that's important that we do that. And then we have some sessions coming up in the next couple of weeks that people can catch. Community Foundations of Canada, a partner of Healthy Communities, is hosting their annual conference, Reconnect 2023. It's in June, first 2 or 3 days of June, and the Healthy Communities Initiative is featured there. Park People's having its big event on the future of parks, June 21 to 23. The theme is Hope in Action. They are a partner on the Healthy Communities Initiative, and there's a session there. And also in a couple of weeks, there's a big international conference from our friends at Project for Public Spaces in New York City are hosting their 11th annual Public Markets Conference, where a ton of placemaking happens, and that happens to be in Toronto, June 8 to 10. And in collaboration with that, or in conjunction with that, there is an inaugural sort of get together of the Canadian placemaking community on the 11th and 12th of June. So I hope you can join. Thanks for being part of this. And thanks for taking an hour and 50 minutes out of your day to talk about the power of placemaking and making the case. Thanks, everybody. Great to see you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
everybody. It was an honor. Have a good one.